Yeah, firstly, it's a pleasure to be here with all these eminent panelists. And secondly, I should apologize for the delay. I was stuck in a workshop we were doing for smallholder tea farmers in Colonna, so it took a little bit more time than I anticipated to get here. So I come from the sector of supply chain management, so most of my thoughts would be basically coming from supply chain and life cycle thinking. So essentially, I think we all should agree to the fact that transportation is a derived demand. It's something that we need in our lives, certainly, and it essentially, in most cases, we would mostly be looking at the object of getting from A to B. So what makes us quite peculiar about the source of energy? I think that's all stitched into sustainability. Because we have understood the fact that we are facing a major crisis, and as a planet, as humanity, we are having a major crisis, existential crisis in terms of ensuring our future. So now there is a lot of movement towards sustainable transportation, and EV seems to be the technology that has moved fastest out of many other technologies that are out there. So at this particular point, our aim should be to make sure that we move faster with better sustainable resources. But when we are going to do that, I think one of the most important things we need to look at is it's not just what sees the eye. So what is for us to see superficially is not essentially the entire story. Because if we look at the supply chain for electric vehicles, it's primarily dependent on a lot of other resources, not fossil fuel, but there are other resources like lithium, nickel, and so on, which is important in the life cycle. So one of the important things that we need to think is we need to start from the point of mining those minerals, the sustainability of it. There's social sustainability issues. Now, for example, most of these minerals are harvested in South America and Africa, and there are certain reports of some of the working conditions. So that from that point onwards to the point of replacing the vehicles, or how do we retire the vehicles. So as we move along, I'm also an EV user, so I drive an electric vehicle and I'm a big fan of it. But I think when we are making that switch, it should not be a blind switch, it should be a switch that we make with cognizance of the entire picture. We should look at it from a holistic picture. So we need to make sure, like there are lots of EV enthusiasts out there, and there are lots of service providers that are out there, but that needs to grow hand in hand, and it needs to go further for us to facilitate an uptick in EVs. That is very important. And I think overall, I think there should be a big push from all stakeholders in terms of making sure that those, if we are to take that leap, we need to take that leap with a plan. We need to have a proper solution in terms of how we train our people in the automotive sector, how we set up charging stations. I think Dr. Subhasingh is involved in that with ChargeNet and so on. There are other service providers who are doing that. So we need to have an infrastructure that supports electric mobility. So one of the most important things is also there are certain factors we need to take into consideration. I think one of the main issues we talked about is energy. So we are aware that we are having an energy crisis in Sri Lanka. We are having power cuts. So, for example, there should be mechanisms introduced. I think Public Utility Commission, for example, I've heard is working on some of those mechanisms. If you are an EV user, there can be different mechanisms where you can charge off-peak if you are charging at your home. I think different service providers have different tariff packages depending on where you charge, what type of chargers you are using, whether it's L1, L2, and so on. So there has to be a concerted effort in order to make that change. That is very important. We can't just blindly move towards it. I think one of the most important things we need to understand is if you take countries like, European Union as a whole, they have taken major measures in moving towards electric mobility. And they have done that with a systemic approach. They are giving a lot of subsidies to renewable energy developers. You might be surprised to hear that in some parts of Europe, for example, energy is, during the summer, energy is given to you on a negative rate. For example, in Germany, during the summer, during the peak hours where there is ample solar photovoltaic energy available, you can use electricity and you get money just for using that. So that is because there's an abundance of solar supply for those summer months. And that encourages people to change their behaviors because they have a spot market where you have 15-minute or 30-minute changes in tariff depending on the supply. We might not be there yet as a country. We might not be in a position to move towards that sort of a change, a shift in terms of the tariff structures and so on. But we need to have a certain dialogue and a potential plan, as Mr. Dialvis mentioned, so that we get there and we deliver a holistic solution that looks at the entire supply chain end to end as a life cycle rather than just looking at just a microcosm of the entire supply chain. I think that is what would make this a very sustainable shift. And I think the other important thing is for the entirety of our lives, humanity's existence, that is, mobility has been a requirement. So initially we would have walked, then we would have used carts, maybe we would have rode animals, then it became, with James Watt's invention of the steam engine, the way we transport changed. So then for a long period of time we were using fossil fuel. So electric mobility is seemingly the next step in that journey. But eventually the destination might not be electric mobility as well. So there can be different other technologies that may pop up in the future. So we have to be cognizant that we need to ride the wave, we need to take that initiative, we need to be sustainable, and we should not be late in terms of adopting that, but we need to be also wary that there can be other opportunities that might loom around in the future as well. And what I'm trying to say here is that whenever such a paradigm shift happens again, as a country, we need to be ready to embrace that. It might be in 20 years, it might be in 30 years, 40 years, maybe even later, we don't know. It can happen depending on the technological advancement. So overall, the important thing is to have a concerted effort which looks at the entire supply chain as a life cycle and ensuring that there is a support network behind to support if there is an electric, if you have an EV, if it comes across any issue, how do you get it fixed? Where do you go? If you are somewhere, let's say for example, if you are in an outstation area, would there be a certain mechanic who would be trained to do that? So we will need to think of those sorts of things. We would need to expand the charging network. We would need to think of end of life cycle management, how to get rid of batteries, especially that if we are just, we cannot just throw them away. And also if there are replacements, how do we do that? So there has to be a major shift in terms of thinking about the entire life cycles. That's my 2 cents in terms of how we need to approach this. Because obviously, the shift to electric vehicles is inevitable. That is going to happen. A lot of these manufacturers have already agreed. They have set concrete deadlines on when they are supposed to do it. For some, it's sooner. For some manufacturers, it's a little later. But one way or the other, we will get there. But how we get there and making sure that we look at all the stakeholders and ensure the benefit of all the stakeholders is very important in the overall picture.